Now we're going to welcome Tyler Cole for our special segment of Net Zero Carbon. We've actually got a special guest with us today. We've got Josh Bouk, who is CEO at Trax down in Atlanta. Guys, thank you both for being here today. I'm here in Chattanooga. Josh, you're down in Atlanta. Tyler's in Nashville. So we've got kind of the entire I-75-24 corridor covered between us.
That sounds great. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a great part of the country right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a really interesting topic on deck for today as well, talking about environmental sustainability, how that correlates to your invoicing. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to data. So Tyler, starting off with you really quickly, data is one of those things that you mention all the time as being absolutely paramount to understanding where you're at your ESG goals, right? If you're not measuring, how can you even start with those goals? Talk a little bit about the importance of data when it comes to invoices to keep you kind of on track for ESG.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to have this segment and to have Josh on too and hear what Trax is doing. As you said, without it, you're lost, right? Data is going to help you set your target. You can't be precise or accurate unless you know where you're heading, and that's where data plays a big role. And just getting started is what we also encourage everybody to. The quality of the data can always improve and get better, but you have to start somewhere. And so invoices are a great place to start. It's important to set the stage for the conversation. We're talking about transportation freight spend. That's typically going to fall in a company's either scope 1 or scope 3. Scope 1 if you own the assets and are responsible for the fueling. Scope 3 if you're buying in or if you have business travel. And in both of those latter cases, generally you're paying those bills. So you can at least get started and understand what your freight spend is. And it could be as simple as taking, here's my spend times an estimated average emission for this mode, for this region, and come up with a number. Now, the trick is, how can we improve that? And that's where I'm interested to hear where some solutions like what Trax comes in can help.
So Josh, with Trax itself, give us a little bit of an overview about what you guys are doing in the space right now and how you guys are really bridging that gap between your invoicing data and those ESG, those sustainability goals.
Yeah, Tyler's exactly right. So it all comes down to data and your access to actuals and the true cost of that freight. Trax for 30 years has been a freight auditor in this space, and over the last 5 years, we've invested over $30 million to build the first global transportation spend management platform that helps all enterprises be able to manage centrally all of their transportation, all modes, all regions, all the cost in one place. When it comes to carbon, a lot of the details, a lot of the data that we're collecting off the invoices, like mileage, like mode, like distance and location. These are things that we use to calculate good carbon emission data too, right? So being able to harness the actuals data coming out of China and Amsterdam and Charleston and collecting all that into one place and using those same data points to then be able to calculate carbon emissions accurately by mode, by vehicle type, by lane is what we're doing within our new Carbon Emissions Manager product.
That seems like a tall order for one product, right? But at the end of the day, it's incredibly important work that needs to be done. For these companies who are looking to get started, maybe they just want to start figuring out, okay, how does the money that I'm spending, how does it even start to align with an ESG goal? Maybe it's just a singular goal. What is their first step? Is it getting involved with a group like Trax to try and track what they're spending on, or is it just starting to take a closer lens on how their business activity is impacting with their carbon footprint and their emissions?
But, I think it's tough for any company to change what they don't measure. And so if we can first have them start to measure what their scope 3 emissions are, which is important because the government's about to make that a requirement, right? The SEC has told us all publicly traded companies are going to need to deliver carbon emissions reporting, including scope 3, by 2025 for the year of 2024. So next year, large enterprise really needs to get serious about being able to just first measure. Then once they measure, now they can apply that data to offer those results to their procurement people to help negotiate contracts with their suppliers, help them decide which suppliers are going to offer better sustainable solutions for transportation using any number of different fuel types and vehicle types and so on. But until we're measuring, we're not, we're nowhere, right? So first step is to measure.
Absolutely. So, Tyler, when we're talking about kind of learning about some of these companies who start to help out in these goals, obviously that's one of your big time goal with Net Zero Carbon is to highlight people who are doing this type of work. Have you been seeing anyone who has really started to come to the forefront of doing this kind of work, other than maybe Trax, but also people who can work hand in hand with this idea like Trax? And is there now a market for this dual kind of handshake effort to kind of collaborate on keeping emissions down, or just measuring those emissions in the first place?
It's definitely a focal point, and you've got a lot of, I would call them incumbents in the industry that are trying to take the data that they currently have and own and figure out how to repurpose it and reuse it to simultaneously achieve ESG reporting goals. I mean, if you think about it, the data we're talking about is out there and has existed. What Josh and his team are saying is essentially, pun intended, the exhaust that you get from all this financial data is that we can now calculate reasonably good emissions estimates. So you'll start to see companies that want to own end-to-end visibility start to offer some carbon accounting, reporting, and measuring, I would anticipate. What companies I don't think are realizing is how analog a lot of the long tail is. And that's where we really, if you want to get really good primary data, we're going to have to start figuring out how to use better digital tools to incorporate actual routing, actual fuel burn at the load level. But that's a big lift for a lot of people and could be many, many years off. And if we're thinking about Scope 3 reporting coming into financial accounting standards within the next 2-3 years, depending on the size of the enterprise, you may have to just start with the estimates, start with your spend data, get your activity, and start drilling down from there so you can really get a good understanding of what your true footprint is.
That's a super great point that you bring up. And Josh, last question for you. I think that it brings to mind a lot of folks who say, I don't necessarily need to do this because it's too big of a task, right? That lift is too huge. It is too much for me to sit down and put a microscope on every single thing my business is doing and then find a way to change that. But that change doesn't necessarily have to come all at one time, right? It could be an incremental approach by finding one problem and making a solution, finding another and making a solution. And at the end of the day, that's kind of how you achieve that mature end-to-end visibility, right? Is one step at a time. Do you think that that needs to be more of a focus for the industry, is allowing for the grace and for the practice and for moving slowly into these goals instead of just overwhelming them with the saying, you know what, you're not doing the right things now. Too bad, you might as well not try at all.
Yeah, I think Tyler's right that getting best in class, true best in class, you would have to put telematics on every single vehicle in every single mode and carrier everywhere in the world to be able to aggregate. And so that the future of that is a long way off. But in the interim, being able to have just a single consistent method for calculating carbon across your modes and being able to find a good data source to allow you to make good assumptions, I think that's going to pass the SEC's criteria. And at Trax, we're just thrilled that we have the leading solution for that space right now in the market. It's exciting. It's an exciting place to be.
Exciting indeed. And we thank you for being on with us to learn a little bit about it today. I wish we had more time to go into it. But of course, now maybe you can connect with Tyler and you guys get a full episode of Net Zero Carbon on that. If folks want to learn a little bit more about Trax, where can they go ahead to do that?
TraxTech.com, TraxTech.com. Thanks so much.
Easy enough. And then Tyler, coming up this Friday for Net Zero Carbon, what can we expect?
Thanks, Kaylee. This was a great segment. Be talking about policy advocacy and how fleets and shippers can get involved in trying to lever up some of these decarbonization solutions we're seeing in the market.
Ooh, I love that. An episode I will definitely be tuning in for. All right, guys, thank you for that. We're going to take another quick break. We'll be right back.